Hi, my name is Dan Stevenson. I work on Microsoft Teams, and I'm here to talk to you about security in Teams, a very important topic, especially for IT admins. First, I'm going to go through a technical overview of Teams so we understand where the security boundaries are and what some of the moving parts are within Microsoft Teams. Then I'm going to dive into specific security capabilities and recommendations covering identity, access, governance, compliance, and devices. After that, I'll recap and talk about next steps for moving forward with Teams in a secure way. Let's first talk a little about what Microsoft Teams is. Microsoft Teams is a chat application, of course, enabling fast and fluid communication within a group of people or a team. Teams also includes file sharing, calling, meetings, and the ability to integrate almost any application into this collaboration workplace. What does this mean from a business perspective? Well, first, Teams will truly transform how people communicate and collaborate within your organization. It breaks down walls and silos and enables people to work together and with the data and documents that matter in a way that they were never able to before. Teams also enables access to existing and new business applications, bringing the data and processes that people are using every day directly to where those people are. Teams works cross-platform, web and PC clients, as well as iOS and Android mobile apps, even a Linux client. And then, the most important topic for this presentation, enterprise-grade security and compliance. From the ground up, Microsoft Teams was built with security in mind. And for the next few minutes, we're going to dive a little deeper into that and understand how you can use different policies and settings and controls to fully configure Teams for the secure enterprise. First, let's take a few minutes to talk about what the architecture of Teams looks like. The Teams clients connect to a number of different cloud services. Within Teams, we call the messaging and calling and meeting services our intelligent communications cloud. We also have other Teams services for managing things like team and channel structure and user settings. These services sit on top of Azure, both for compute and for storage. And then adjacent, but equally important, are a set of Office 365 services, or Microsoft 365 services, that provide things like compliance storage on Exchange, file storage in SharePoint and OneDrive, and many other applications and services that are integrated into Teams, including, of course, strong identity management from Azure Active Directory and the associated security capabilities around Endpoint Manager, conditional access, and so on. Let's talk a little about where data are stored inside of Teams. The core data assets, the messaging data, are stored inside an Azure-based chat service, along with images and other metadata related to the chat message content. Files are on SharePoint or OneDrive for Business. Voicemails go to Exchange, along with calendar meetings and contacts. We keep recordings on Azure, and then later they're put into Stream. And we also make a full copy of all the messaging data stored onto Exchange for compliance and e-discovery purposes, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So where are Teams data stored? Well, we have regional data centers in Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. We have in-country data centers located in various locations around the world, with more coming soon. In these regional or in-country data centers, we store the core Teams data, chat and channel messages, images, voicemail, and contacts, along with files from SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. So let's start with our first security topic, identity and access. And here we're going to talk about three specific areas. First, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and SMS codes. How you can enforce strong authentication and protect against unauthorized or atypical access risks. Second, information barriers. which allows you to create different segments within your company directory to block discovery and communication as appropriate. And third, managing guest access, how to allow external members to participate and collaborate in your team experiences. Multi-factor authentication prevents 99.9% of identity attacks. There are several different ways of using multi-factor authentication in Teams. My preferred model is the Authenticator app or Windows Hello, because it's so obviously easy to use. On the right-hand side, you can see what happens when a pop-up appears asking somebody to authenticate. And in this case, they're being asked to authenticate with their phone number, and a text message will be sent to their phone number, or in this case, a telephone call will be made to their phone number requiring them to enter in their PIN. Conditional access is a way that we can allow different security policies to be implemented based on signals like the user's location or who they are, the device that they're on, whether or not it's a managed device, which application they're using, and then certain AI-driven real-time risk signals like repeated requests for the same resource or repeated access attempts from the same device or the same location. With conditional access, we then decide whether to allow access or require an additional verification through multi-factor authentication, or even block access completely, depending on how the rules play out. Here's an example of how we have set up a conditional access policy for Microsoft Teams with certain conditions we're looking for. And then depending on what the user is doing, we'll take different actions. For example, the user may be blocked from accessing Microsoft Teams from non-work locations. So they were allowed in, but then they were blocked from continuing because they were not in the right location. Or on the bottom, we're preventing access even though they're an authenticated user because the device is unmanaged. We'll talk a little bit later about device management as well. Another thing to think about in terms of identity and access is how we manage credentials for first-line workers. First-line workers are the retail or hospitality or manufacturing employees who are often at the front line of customer service, often very underserved from an IT perspective. Although now with Microsoft Teams, we have some excellent capabilities to provide to them. But we also have to make sure that they're secure. One of the challenges the first-line workers face is how they actually manage password resets and their overall identity situation. With the new SMS sign-in capability, first-line workers can simply sign in with a one-time code sent to their phone, very similar to what they might do for a social media app or even an online finance app. Even better, line managers, so department managers, factory floor managers, etc., not IT, can actually update phone numbers and reset passwords through our new delegated management capability. What this ultimately does is it makes it easier and more secure for first-line workers to access Teams without having to remember or write down a password and without creating a lot of burden on the help desk with password reset requests. It also means that it's one step easier to bring their devices into compliance and management within the Teams footprint. Now, another way we may want to secure Teams for different populations of workers is to use information barriers. Think about information barriers as a way to create separate directories, almost like separate subcompanies within your Azure Active Directory. Information barriers will block people from finding each other from one department to another to chat or to call or share their screen. It also applies to SharePoint file access. So you can see in the example here, we're taking two different populations of users, one in the management group, one in the operations group, and separating them so that they cannot talk to each other. They can't even add each other to a team, that boundary. Here's how you set it up using our admin UI. You create an information barrier policy. You assign certain users to it, And then you can see that when I go to search for somebody, or when I try to join a meeting that they hosted, or when I try to have them on my team, if the information barrier policy blocks that, then I can't. I'm out of luck. Not all collaboration happens within the company, of course. We also want to support secure exchanges with people outside of our organization. So that's where guest access comes in. Guest access, which applies to cross-tenant, cross-company, cross-tenant guests, which we often call Azure Active Directory B2B guests, because that's the platform. This is a secure way of bringing external users into your collaboration space in a very managed manner. They get access to all the shared resources in the team, but they are also subject to certain permissions and settings and policies. You can see on the right the type of invitation, email, or notification that a newly invited guest would receive. Now, guest access is different from external access or federation, which is a way that you can chat or call with somebody while they stay inside their own tenant. So there's no shared resources. It's like calling across the cloud from tenant to tenant. And then you can also have another flavor of guest or external experience called meeting guests. These are when external parties can join chat or view content in a meeting. But once they leave the meeting, they no longer have access. So let's go back to the regular external user guest access and talk about how that works. You can apply certain settings and policies on guests to make sure that they have access and permission to do exactly what you want. As you can see in the lower right, if a guest is on a team, it's very clear to everybody else that that team has a guest on it. We always want to make sure that people know that there are guests around when they're sharing. You can fine-tune guest security in a number of different ways. You can require multi-factor authentication on your guests, and you can even require them to review a terms of use document. This is a great way to create good, secure onboarding practices for guests, even though they're not part of your organization. Another way you can fine-tune guest access is by just defining or specifying exactly which companies guests can come from. I may only have 1 or 2 companies that I want to work with, so I put them on the allow list. Nobody else can be invited as a guest. I may also wish to control where my employees can go out to as guests using their identity from my company. Currently, there's a feature called tenant restrictions, which uses a proxy to block access to Teams and other Office 365 services. This is in use in production by many companies around the world. That being said, it is a little bit cumbersome, and we have some other solutions in the works. So let's talk about some recommendations for identity and access. First, implement multi-factor authentication. This is an easy one, and do that for users and guests. Then, look at using conditional access to create the appropriate access boundaries and rules, and detect suspicious behavior based on those signals. Use information barriers, if appropriate for your organization, to separate guests out from other users or separate different departments. Another option, which is a little bit extreme, is to use an extranet tenant so that you can actually put all your guests in a separate tenant and some of your employees as well. It's a little bit extreme. You should be able to be just fine using information barriers and the regular guest access policies. Speaking of guest access, some basic guidelines here. Allow team owners to invite guests, and then you can use Azure Access Reviews to audit that. Do look at restricting where guests come from, and take a look at the specific policies for messaging, calling, and meetings that apply to guests. For example, on the right here, you see messaging policies specifically for guests. Are they allowed to edit sent messages? Are they allowed to chat? Are they allowed to use memes or stickers? All of these are options that you can configure and should take a look at when setting up guest access. A few more things to think about. Look at doing those custom terms of use and privacy links for guests signing into your tenant. Look at using tenant restrictions to block outbound guest access by your employees. And then with some customization, take a look at only allowing guests on specific teams, restricting exactly who can invite a guest, or labeling all guests with a special indicator, like all capital letters external user. Some other identity and access recommendations. Take a look at SMS sign-in and delegated user management to improve first-line worker security and make things easier on your help desk. If you want to do that cross-tenant, cross-cloud federated messaging I talked about, you can specify which domains your company is allowed to talk to. And I highly recommend you enable the lobby feature for external meeting guests so that users outside your company wait in a lobby to be reviewed by the meeting organizer before they are admitted into the meeting. And now some links for additional information on identity and access security. There's a great blog post and a details page on multi-factor authentication, more information on conditional access, SMS sign-in, and how to set up information barriers. And then check out the overview and details about managing guest access, plus a pointer on how to set up tenant restrictions. So now let's talk about governance and how to be secure in managing, administrating, managing the life cycle in Microsoft Teams. Three general areas here that I want to talk about. First is just managing and monitoring teams and the related services and how we can use specialized admin roles to do that in a secure way. Second, creating the appropriate policies and settings for all or some of your users to govern specific features and use cases inside Teams, including some that are very sensitive from a security perspective. And then third, good governance and security practices for Teams and channel management, which is at the core of the Microsoft Teams experience. Let's first take a look at the application UIs available to you as a Teams admin. There's, of course, the Teams Admin Center shown here. There's the Security and Compliance Center, which provides launching points into all of these security, compliance, records management, DLP, and other features, which we'll talk more about later when I talk about compliance. And then there's the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, which is a great place to go to manage groups, but also things like conditional access and licenses. You will know, of course, that there is considerable overlap between these different admin centers and also the overall Microsoft 365 Admin Center at admin.microsoft.com. That's sort of by design. We want to make sure that the common functions are available where you need them. The backends are all the same, and everything uses the same or similar APIs to communicate. So no matter what your preferred habit is, rest assured that you're always working with the most up-to-date configuration. Within Teams, of course, we don't want you to have to be the global tenant admin in order to do things. So we've created 4 different roles: Teams Service Admin, Communications Admin, and then Communication Support Engineer and Communication Support Specialist. These roles provide very focused access to specific teams and related capabilities within the admin centers. They are not fully privileged like a global tenant admin. So, for example, you may wish to set a few individuals in the organization to have global tenant admin permissions, maybe even with some additional identity security on top of that. But then you only want to have the Teams admin permissions assigned to a broader set of users who maybe are regionally based or within specific business unit IT departments who can provide Teams management for their stakeholders. In the admin centers, you also notice some interesting activity reports. We have some here on the different Office 365 workloads or Microsoft 365 workloads in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. We also have great usage reports in the Teams Admin Center at the user level about live events and so on. And there's also the call analytics and call quality dashboard, which if you're doing a telephony deployment is a great place to look to get operational and usage intelligence. Then as a team owner or team member, you can also see analytics about the teams that you own or are a member of within the Teams client application. So let's talk about some of the settings and policies you will want to apply to ensure good security in teams. Settings operate across the entire tenant. They are, in a sense, global. Policies are a collection of attributes that govern how a particular feature or set of features work for an assigned set of users. I may create a global policy and assign that to everybody, or I might want to create a policy just for my first line workers and give them a different set of permissions. Here are some examples and details on some of the different policies available within Teams. Team policies define what users can do in teams and channels. Messaging policies, shown on the right, let you decide which chat and channel messaging features are available to users. This is worth spending some time looking at and making sure that you're cool with the capabilities listed here and that these are the right ones available for the right users. Meeting settings and meetings policies govern what happened with meetings. In particular, in meetings policies, you should look at things like anonymous access to meetings and who has to wait in the lobby. App setup policies are another very important way of managing security in Teams. As you know, Teams comes with several hundred applications built into the App Store. You will surely want to use app permission policies to decide which one of those make the most sense for your company. We would encourage you to enable any application that you think your users are using right now or will use, because once those apps come to life inside Teams, it increases productivity and user engagement significantly. You can also use app setup policies to govern which apps appear and in what order for which users. So maybe you want a specific set of users, like first-line workers, to have certain features prominently displayed and the rest either below the fold, essentially off the initial screen, or maybe even blocked. You can also set policies on who can upload custom applications within your organization. Another important aspect of good governance and secure governance in Teams relates to teams and channel management. This includes things like managing the team and channel structure, setting different lifecycle policies, and also managing growth or sprawl within your teams and channels. You can configure team and channel structure and settings in the Admin Center, in PowerShell or via PowerShell, or through custom coding in the Graph API. You can also do this on a per team basis in the Teams app as a team owner, but oftentimes it is easier for an admin to go in and do this in the Admin Center. You can practice good hygiene around archiving teams that are old, updating ownership of teams that have maybe an owner that has left the company, and then just reviewing what's going on with channels and private channels. You can also configure per team settings, governing messaging and who can create a channel, things like that. And you can decide which users or whether users are allowed to add or edit channels in a team. Lifecycle is a very important facet of team governance. You want to decide what type of team is this? Is it a public, a private, or an organizational-wide team? Who is allowed to create a team? What are the naming conventions associated with teams? Prefixes, suffixes, or blocked words? Are there data classification labels you want to apply to a team? And is there an expiration policy? After 6 months, does the team expire? And as you can see in the image on the right, does the owner of the team have to click a renew button to continue using that team? You will also want to take a look at your policies around private channels. A private channel is like a subset of a team that only certain people on the team have access to. Rather than create a separate team for them, we encourage people to use private channels instead. So what are some recommendations we have around practicing good governance security in Microsoft Teams? Well, first, set up those special teams administrator roles, the role-based admin control, so that you can ensure you don't need to have your global admins doing some of the basic Teams management functions. Second, review all the policies and decide if you need to create a different policy set for certain groups of users, whether that's executives or first-line workers or developers. Look at messaging, meetings, and calling policies, but also look at the application policies to decide which apps should be available. And then spend some time thinking about team and channel management. We recommend that you, in general, try to empower your employees to create teams on their own with regular audits to make sure there isn't too much excessive creation of teams. An alternative, of course, is to create a workflow and approval system and only allow certain people to create teams. You can also have an expiration policy, like, for example, 12 months, to ensure that stale teams just naturally die away. And we also advise that as part of your adoption strategy, you create certain teams up front, whether those are based on projects or departments or manager organizations. It's really useful to have that framework in place if you can, so that you have kind of a scaffolding for collaboration activities. And then related to something we talked about earlier, also check out information barriers if you are looking to protect sensitive information on one team from users on another team. Remember, of course, that the users on a team are the only people who have access to that data. Just because I'm in the tenant, a user or a guest, doesn't mean I get access to that other team. So you have a very clear security boundary around a team, even without using information barriers. So there are also some other governance solutions to check out. For example, partners like AvePoint and SalesTim have good products for managing governance and migration and all sorts of other capabilities. Definitely worth checking those out. And any other partner who builds atop our graph APIs. And then we also have an app available on GitHub called the Teams Admin Bot, which is a nice starting point for planning your own custom workflow for team management. For more information, there's a link there to the Admin Center overview, role-based admin, and usage reporting. Also check out the governance planning guide and some great video training on being a Teams admin. So let's talk about one of the biggest and most valuable security topics. That's compliance and data security. Now, compliance is about things like archiving and retention and e-discovery. Data loss prevention is related to that and governs making sure that data does not leave your company if it should not. And then we always want to make sure that we are providing our end users with secure access to company data and our own applications. Let's start. So in Teams, every message and every file is archived for search, supervision, and e-discovery. As I mentioned earlier in the overview, we store all that in a special storage system on Exchange, and we even capture edits and deletes. So we have a perfect record of everything that was shared and done within Teams. We don't have the audio video data for calls and meetings, but we do have third-party integrations that provide exactly that. We call that compliance recording. There's a great admin center called the Compliance Portal that you can go to at compliance.office.com and start by getting your compliance score and then manage your policies or create new policies, look at reports, etc. So how does that all work? Well, we have the chat data coming from Teams, as well as file data, of course. Chat data goes into our chat service. File data goes to SharePoint. We then have, for the chat data, some ingestion services that ended up pulling that together with email and, of course, our chat and channel messages into Exchange, into a special storage layer in Exchange for compliance. Essentially, the same thing happens on the SharePoint side. And then the information protection applications for discovery and content search and all that, they simply query against those two data stores. You can see here, for example, how it works within e-discovery. We have an e-discovery policy that is created. Then at some time later, there's some kind of a discoverable content that's created. Somebody sends a message. That message matches the e-discovery policy, so it's collected. Then this is a really cool feature. You can go in and redact and say, hey, as part of this discovery process, not everything here needs to be shared with whoever's suing me. So I'm going to redact that part out, and then only the relevant information ends up being shared out afterwards. Another cool feature in here is called data supervision. With data supervision, you choose certain locations that you want to monitor for potential violations of code of conduct, for example. And then you designate a set of special security staff who have the permissions to go in and review the supervised content. And you can see here, it doesn't leave much to the imagination, but you can see here there was certainly some colorful messaging going on that may in fact violate the code of conduct for this company. Closely related to e-discovery is the idea of retention policies. Retention policies, you can specify how long data lives until it gets deleted. This applies to the main chat store in Teams that everybody sees when they're using the app, but it also applies to the archive content store on Exchange that's used for e-discovery and so on. Another really cool feature here for compliance security is in the area of data loss prevention. So the goal here is to stop users from really accidentally or unintentionally sharing sensitive information outside of the company, or even with the wrong people inside the company. You can see here that the sender of this message was trying to send out some information that matched a particular regular expression pattern that they were not allowed to. That sender received a message telling them that their content was blocked, their message was blocked. And then the recipient of that, they don't even know. They just see something telling them that the message was blocked due to sensitive content. You may have noticed there is the option for the sender to override, and that's logged. But that's actually a nice way of empowering users to make smart decisions if they really do have a legitimate business need to share this information. In a similar vein, we have this concept feature called Windows Information Protection. With the Windows Information Protection, you can make sure that files that are downloaded are encrypted and cannot be moved from a workspace to a personal space. I often get asked about blocking downloads. This isn't really about blocking downloads. This is even better. It's allowing people to download, but doing it in a secure, encrypted way. A variant of this is around copy-paste. You can see this slightly contrived example where somebody is trying to copy some text, which contains something maybe a little sensitive. And then they're trying to share that into a Gmail message, and no, they cannot, because that content is protected through Windows Information Protection. There are a few other neat things here too. For example, the ability to scan links to malicious sites and show a warning. So here I've got a marketing plan link that is not any really good marketing plan. It pops up an error saying that the website is malicious. Or maybe somebody gave me a malware file on a USB stick, and when that gets opened up in Teams, we scan that as well and can make sure that it gets flagged. In fact, if you email into a Teams channel, which is kind of a cool feature for emailing a channel, we also scan those mails and make sure that they don't contain any malware. Another question I get asked a lot about is, yeah, okay, we're kind of cool with going to Teams, it's in the cloud, but we're going to make peace with that. But SharePoint files, that's too dangerous. We really don't want people using that in the cloud. And I understand that. A lot of the most sensitive information a company has, especially durable information, could be contained in files. It is, of course, possible to set lots of different permissions on SharePoint for read-only access and so on. But one of the things that we also get asked about is, How do I allow people to keep using Teams, maybe from certain locations outside my company network, but not have access to files? And so there's actually a feature in SharePoint that allows you to set location-based policies. You specify essentially a net mask that defines what networks are allowed or not allowed to access SharePoint. This is a pretty easy way to make sure that SharePoint files are only visible within your company's network. One word of caution on this: be very careful how you set it up, and always make sure you keep one of your internal IP address ranges, or maybe the admin's home computer, keep that available and allowed. I have several times accidentally locked myself out, and then you have to make a support call to Microsoft, because when you get locked out, you get locked out from SharePoint and the overall SharePoint Admin Center. Now, not all the data that people are using in Teams comes from files. In fact, that's by design. We really want people to bring their line of business applications into Teams. Sometimes those applications live on premises, which is great. That's where a lot of technology investment has been. But Teams requires cloud access to applications. So here are some strategies for dealing with securely integrating applications into Teams. First, anytime you're building or customizing an app, leverage AAD single sign-on. That way your users do not have to have a separate set of credentials. Second, I mentioned earlier the app permission policies. You can use that to make sure that whatever app it is only available to the users who need to have it. And then third, there's this really cool thing called Azure AD Application Proxy that allows you to securely integrate an on-premises application into Teams. This allows you to create a very narrow pipe, very controlled, between your on-premises app and your authenticated users in Teams. So let's talk about some recommendations around compliance and data security. First, for compliance, set the right retention policies for whatever matters for your organization. It would make sense to align those across Teams, SharePoint, and Exchange, of course. Supervision is a cool feature to use if you're trying to enforce some conduct policies or look for specific actions. DLP for certain industries and use cases is a good way to reduce risk. And then, as with some of the other sections, check out the information barrier policies, because you may want to use information barriers to also reduce the risk of data leakage. From a data security perspective, use advanced threat protection to secure files and links, and what I just talked about, the Azure AD Application Proxy, to integrate your on-prem apps. So here are some resources to help you get started. First, check out the Compliance Center. That's the IT admin portal. There's also a helpful compliance overview there. You can read more about DLP, and you will probably want to check out licensing info. A lot of what I've discussed is available in the basic or any Office 365 suite, but some of these features are only in E5 or require a premium AAD license. There's more information there about information governance and retention, advanced threat protection for the links, and Windows information protection. And then that SharePoint location-based access policy, you can read about it at that link. And remember, as I said before, this is a great way to ensure people can access Teams but not SharePoint. But be careful, make sure you still add one network able to access SharePoint so that you can still manage this. So our last security topic, device security. This is a little shorter. There are really only two areas I want to talk about: endpoint security and first-line worker devices. Endpoint security is really primarily about Intune, or as we're now calling the broader product, Microsoft Endpoint Manager. There are two general categories within that: MDM, or Mobile Device Management, and MAM, Mobile Application Management. Within device management, you can have policies that require a password or a PIN. You can push down Wi-Fi certificates. You can support users' own devices, but they have to consent to have that device managed. And you can do remote wipes if a device is stolen, or somebody runs off and leaves the company with all the data. Application management provides a similar set of capabilities, but scoped at the application level. And with MAM, you can still do quite a lot, like blocking, copy, paste, and file saving, or removing data for a specific app if the user or the device disappears. There are some screens there on the right showing you what a few of these features look like in action. For example, when a device becomes managed, the user has to restart the application, and maybe in this case, they're required to enter a PIN to use the app. If I have a policy that blocks saving files to the device, then all those helpful links in the Office app for saving files are gone, but there's a reason they're gone, because my policy doesn't allow them to go there. And I can even have a policy that says, hey, you can log in, like we're not going to stop you from using Microsoft Teams from the App Store on your own device. But if you log into your company account, we're not going to let you proceed to use Teams because the policy says you have to have a managed device in order to use this app for this company. Now, first-line workers is not an area that we usually think about from a device security perspective, but there's some interesting aspects to Teams here that are worth talking about. First, in a lot of first-line scenarios, they're taking pictures, collecting visual data. We make sure that if that data is captured with the Teams camera, that it stays within Teams, within the secure data storage of Teams, and is not available on that device's camera roll, for example. You probably know that a lot of other applications can have access to a device's camera roll, and we want to make sure that Teams data stays in Teams. These devices are also used by people who are sharing devices or sharing a job over the course of a day with different shifts. So we provide the ability for one-click global sign-out of not just Teams, but also all the other Office 365 services that they may be using. And when a shift worker is off the clock, we can block them from using Teams even on their own device. We can warn them that if they use Teams, they're not on the clock, or we can just block it completely until their next shift comes in. So what are some recommendations we have around device security? Well, first, take a look at MDM and MAM solutions with Endpoint Manager. Even MAM itself is a pretty powerful way to enable secure usage of end-user devices. It is very common to expect end users to have smartphones that they want to use within collaboration experience like Teams. Teams has a great mobile app. It would be great for you to then enable the MAM policies so that your employees can use it, but you are still confident that you have blocked all the things you want to block. And if the user, the phone takes a hike, you can quickly wipe the data for that app. We didn't talk about this in detail, but Microsoft Teams rooms can be enrolled in Intune, and you can set certain compliance policies on those. It's a good way to manage an additional set of devices in the company. And then for first-line workers, check out the global sign-out feature and ensure that people are using the camera to share media within a chat. For more information, check out essentially the information portal about Endpoint Manager. Read more on our global sign-out and off-shift access features. There's some overview pages on MDM and MAM, and then there's a little guide to setting up Microsoft Teams rooms using Intune. Okay, so we finished our presentation here on security in Teams. We started with a review of the Teams architecture and data residency. We then got into some specific guidance around multi-factor authentication and guest, the different admin roles, reporting, teams and channels, compliance, data security, and then at the end there, device management and device access. Some helpful links if you want to keep learning here. First, there is an excellent video series put out by Matt Sosman, one of the security architects at Microsoft. I made a playlist on YouTube, and you can click there to see that. and check out what Matt put together. There are 7 really, really good videos there. And then second, there's a link to the general security overview portal within Teams that will tell you pointers to all the information we discussed today. All right, so pretty good recap there of what's going on with security in Teams. I hope you have enough information to get started, and please check out those resources if you need more. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in Teams.